I was drinking my morning coffee when I noticed the dump truck backing into my side yard. And before I could even set down my mug, 3 men were already heaving stacks of broken pavers onto my property like it was their personal landfill. My name is Chen, and I had been living in the Maplewood Springs subdivision in Naperville, Illinois, for exactly 7 months. The neighborhood was one of those picture-perfect developments where every lawn looked like it belonged in a magazine and every mailbox was the same shade of bronze. I had bought my 3-bedroom colonial because it was close to my job at the engineering firm downtown, and honestly, I had been warned about the HOA before I moved in. The real estate agent had given me this nervous laugh when she mentioned it, saying something about how they were very thorough about maintaining community standards. I should have paid more attention to that warning. The dump truck pulled away, leaving behind what looked like several tons of old, chipped, and broken pavers in a massive pile right next to my property line. I walked outside in my slippers, coffee still in hand, staring at this mountain of discarded construction material that had just materialized on my lawn. There had been no warning, no phone call, no courtesy email. Nothing. I was still standing there processing what had just happened when my neighbor Dave walked over from across the street. He was a retired postal worker in his 60s who had lived in Maplewood Springs since it was built 15 years ago. He looked at the pile and let out a low whistle. "Let me guess," he said, shaking his head. "The HOA is redoing the community center plaza. They are doing what now?" I asked, still not quite believing that someone had just dumped what looked like several thousand pounds of construction debris on my property. "Yeah, they have been talking about it for months. Got some fancy new Italian tiles or something. Those old pavers have been there since the community center was built." He walked closer to the pile, nudging one of the broken pieces with his foot. "But dumping them on your yard, that is a new low even for Brenda. Brenda Patterson, HOA president. She has been running this place like her own personal kingdom for the last 8 years. Dave gave me a sympathetic look. "You have not had a run-in with her yet?" I shook my head. I had been keeping a low profile, mostly just going to work and coming home. I had not even been to one of the HOA meetings that apparently happened every month at the community center. Consider yourself lucky then. "But this," he gestured at the pile, "this is probably going to change that." Dave was right. About 2 hours later, I was in my home office trying to focus on some CAD drawings when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a woman in her late 40s standing on my porch, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that looked expensive, and her blonde hair was styled in that aggressive bob cut that seemed to be the unofficial uniform of HOA presidents everywhere. "Chen," she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew exactly who I was. "That is me. I am Brenda Patterson, president of the Maplewood Springs Homeowners Association." She did not offer her hand. "I am here to discuss the unsightly pile of debris in your side yard." I actually laughed. I could not help it. "The unsightly pile that your crew dumped there this morning." Her expression did not change. The HOA utilized a section of community easement to temporarily store materials. "However, as the adjacent property owner, you are responsible for ensuring that your yard maintains the aesthetic standards outlined in our covenant. That pile is visible from Maple Grove Drive, and we have already received 3 complaints. 3 complaints. It has been there for like 3 hours. The community takes pride in our appearance, Mr. Chen." She made a note on her clipboard. "I am going to need you to remove those materials within 48 hours, or you will be subject to fines starting at $50 per day. You want me to remove the pavers that you dumped on my property? As I stated, it is an easement area. But yes, the materials need to be removed, and as the property owner, that responsibility falls to you." She handed me a piece of paper from her clipboard. "This is your formal notice. Have a good day, Mr. Chen." She turned and walked back to her white Lexus SUV parked in my driveway, leaving me standing there holding a notice that threatened me with fines for a problem I had not created. I called the HOA office that afternoon. A cheerful woman named Patricia answered, and when I explained the situation, her voice lost some of its perkiness. "Oh yes, the Pavers situation. Mrs. Patterson did mention that. She mentioned dumping several tons of broken pavers on my property without asking. Well, technically, Mr. Chen, according to the plat map filed with the county, there is a 5-foot easement on the eastern edge of your property that is designated for community use. The materials were placed within that easement. Okay, but even if that is true, why is it my responsibility to remove them?" There was a pause. "I will have to check with Mrs. Patterson on that and get back to you." She never got back to me. That evening, I pulled out all my closing documents and found the property survey. Patricia was technically correct. There was a 5-foot easement along the side of my property, marked clearly on the plat map. It was meant for utility access and community maintenance. But nowhere in any of the documents did it say that the HOA could use it as a dumping ground or that I would be responsible for cleaning up anything they put there. I spent the next morning reading through the entire HOA covenant. It was 63 pages of single-spaced legal text that covered everything from approved mailbox designs to the exact shade of white that was acceptable for window trim. There was a whole section about yard maintenance and another about construction debris. According to Section 7.3, Paragraph B, any construction debris visible from public streets had to be removed within 72 hours. But Section 12.4 stated that the HOA was responsible for maintenance and cleanup of all common areas and easements. It seemed pretty clear to me that they were responsible for their own mess. I drafted a polite email to the HOA office, citing the relevant sections and requesting that they remove the pavers they had deposited. I sent it Tuesday afternoon. By Wednesday morning, I had a response from Brenda Patterson herself. The email was 3 paragraphs of bureaucratic doublespeak that essentially said no. Her argument was that while the HOA was responsible for easement maintenance, they were not responsible for materials storage. And since the materials were now on the easement, they had become my problem as the adjacent landowner. She also reminded me that I now had less than 24 hours to remove them before the fine started. I called Dave that evening to vent. He listened to the whole story, then started laughing. "What is so funny?" I asked. "Marcus, you have not figured it out yet." "Figured what out?" "She is trying to bait you into a fight. Brenda does this. She picks someone, usually someone new who has not learned how to play her games yet, and she tests them. Pushes them around a bit to see if they will push back. If you make a big stink about this, argue with her, threaten lawyers, whatever, she will make your life miserable. She will find every tiny violation in your yard, every little thing that is not quite up to code, and she will fine you into oblivion. So what am I supposed to do? Just eat the cost of hauling away several tons of pavers?" "No," Dave said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "You do what I did when she tried something similar with me 5 years ago. You outplay her." "What do you mean?" "Think about it, Marcus. You are an engineer. Be creative." I sat in my kitchen that night, looking out the window at the massive pile of pavers illuminated by my floodlight. They were old and many were cracked or broken, but they were still pavers. Some of them were actually in pretty decent shape. And I had been thinking about putting in a path from my driveway to my back gate, something to keep from tracking mud through the grass when I took out the trash or worked in the yard. The idea hit me around midnight and I actually started laughing. Thursday morning I called in sick to work. Well, not sick exactly. I took a personal day. Then I called a local landscaping supply company and asked about renting a wheelbarrow and getting a load of sand and gravel delivered. The guy on the phone quoted me prices, and I arranged for delivery that afternoon. Then I got to work. The first thing I did was sort through the pile of pavers. There had to be at least 400 of them, maybe more. About 60% were in decent condition, just old and faded. The rest were chipped or cracked, but still usable if I was careful about placement. I started hauling them, one wheelbarrow load at a time, from the side yard to my driveway area. My back gate opened onto a section of yard that led to my garage. There was currently just a dirt path that I had been walking on for months, and it had turned into a muddy mess every time it rained. I had been planning to do something about it eventually, but I had not gotten around to it. Now I had several hundred free pavers to solve the problem. By Thursday afternoon, I had cleared about a third of the pile and had started laying out the pattern for my path. The sand and gravel arrived around 2, and I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing the base. It was hard work, and I was not exactly a professional landscaper, but I had done enough DIY projects to know the basics. Level the ground, lay down landscape fabric, add the gravel base, top with sand, then set the pavers. I was out there until after dark, working under my floodlights when Dave walked over with 2 beers. "I figured you could use this," he said, handing me one. "You were right," I told him, cracking it open. "This is way more satisfying than arguing with her. Just wait until she sees what you are doing." He looked at the partially completed path. "You know, that actually looks pretty good." "Thanks. I figure by Saturday I will have the whole thing done and that pile will be gone. No fines, no arguments, and I get a free path out of the deal." "And you are going to send her a thank you note, right?" I looked at him. "What? Marcus, you have got to send her a thank you note. Really polite, really sincere, thanking the HOA for the generous donation of materials for your home improvement project." He was grinning now. "Trust me, that is what will really get her." Friday, I took another personal day and continued working on the path. Word had apparently gotten around the neighborhood about what I was doing because I had a steady stream of visitors stopping by to check out my progress. Most of them thought it was hilarious. My neighbor to the south, a woman named Linda who worked as a teacher, brought me lemonade around noon. "I heard what Brenda tried to pull," she said. "This is perfect. She tried to stick you with a problem, and you turned it into a solution." A guy from 2 streets over named Tom stopped by in the afternoon. "Hey, if you have any pavers left over, I could use some for a fire pit area I am building. I will even come haul them away for you." "I will let you know," I told him. "I think I am going to use most of them, but there are definitely some broken ones I cannot use." By Friday evening, my path was about 70% done, and the pile in my side yard had shrunk dramatically. The path looked good, too. I had arranged the pavers in a herringbone pattern, using the best ones in the main walking area and the slightly damaged ones along the edges where they would be less visible. I had even used some of the broken pieces to create a small decorative border. Saturday morning, I was back out there at dawn, determined to finish. My entire body ached. I was not used to this much physical labor, and I was definitely going to feel it for the next week. But I was also running on pure spite at this point, and that was a powerful motivator. Around 10 in the morning, a white Lexus SUV pulled up in front of my house. I knew without looking who it was. Brenda Patterson got out of her car and walked up my driveway, her heels clicking on the concrete. She was wearing another pantsuit, this one in pale blue, and her expression was difficult to read. "Mr. Chen," she said. "Mrs. Patterson." I did not stop working. I was in the middle of setting a particularly tricky section of pavers around the gate post. "I see you have been busy." "Just taking care of that pile of debris," I said. "Did not want to incur any fines." She walked closer, examining my work. I could not tell if she was angry, impressed, or planning my demise. Possibly all three. You used the pavers, she said. Yep, seemed wasteful to just haul them to a landfill when they were perfectly good. Well, mostly good, some of them were pretty beat up. I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans. I am actually almost done. Should have the whole pile cleared by this afternoon, no fines necessary. This was not approved by the Architectural Review Committee, she said, and I could hear the ice in her voice now. Really, I will have to check on that. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo I had taken of the relevant covenant section. According to Section 9.2 of the HOA covenant, homeowners are permitted to install walkways and paths without prior approval, provided they are constructed of approved materials and do not exceed certain size limits. Pavers are listed as an approved material in Appendix C, and my path is well under the square footage limit. I had done my homework. Brenda's jaw tightened. The pavers were community property. Were they? I kept my voice friendly, conversational. That is interesting. So the HOA wanted to store community property on the easement adjacent to my yard for how long? That is not the point. I think it kind of is the point, actually. Because if they were community property, then the community was storing several tons of materials on an easement indefinitely, which seems like it would violate Section 8.4 about obstructions of common areas. But if they were not community property anymore, if they were, say, discarded materials, then I was actually doing the community a service by cleaning them up. I smiled at her. Either way, the problem is solved. The pile is almost gone and I have got a nice new path. For a long moment, she just stared at me. I could see her trying to figure out if there was any angle she could use to make this into a violation, any rule she could twist to come after me. But I had checked everything, twice. This is not over, she finally said. Have a great weekend, Mrs. Patterson. She walked back to her Lexus, got in, and drove away with a bit more acceleration than was probably necessary for a residential street. Dave, who had apparently been watching from his window, came over immediately. That was beautiful, he said. Did you see her face? I was kind of worried she was going to have a stroke right here in my driveway. Nah, Brenda is tougher than that, but you definitely got under her skin. He helped me lift a bag of sand. So you are really going to send the thank you note? Oh, absolutely. I am going to write it tonight. I finished the path by 3 that afternoon. The pile was not completely gone yet. There were still some broken pieces and chunks that I could not use, but it was maybe 10% of the original size. I called Tom, the guy who wanted pavers for his fire pit, and he came over with his truck and hauled away everything I had left. He was thrilled. By dinner time Saturday, my side yard was clear except for some dirt stains on the grass, and I had a beautiful new path from my driveway to my back gate. It was not professional quality, maybe, but it was solid, functional, and honestly looked pretty damn good for a rush job done by an engineer with no formal landscaping training. That evening, I sat down at my computer and composed the thank you note. It took me 6 drafts to get the tone exactly right. Too sarcastic and it would just be petty. Too sincere and it would not have the impact I wanted. I needed something that sounded genuinely grateful while also making it absolutely clear that I knew exactly what she had tried to do. This is what I finally settled on. Dear Mrs. Patterson and the Maplewood Springs HOA Board, I wanted to take a moment to express my sincere gratitude for the generous donation of pavers that were left in my side yard this past Tuesday. While I was initially surprised by the delivery, I quickly realized what a wonderful opportunity this represented. As you may have noticed, I have used the donated materials to construct a new walkway from my driveway to my back gate. This path has been on my project list for several months, but the cost of materials had been a barrier. Thanks to the HOA's unexpected generosity, I was able to complete this improvement to my property at minimal expense. The pavers, despite their age, were perfect for this project. I was able to use the majority of them, and I found another community member who was happy to take the remaining pieces for his own landscaping project. It is wonderful to see our community coming together and reusing materials in sustainable ways. I have attached several photographs of the completed path for your records and for the Architectural Review Committee files. As you can see, the work complies with all relevant sections of our HOA covenant, including the approved materials list and size restrictions for walkways. Thank you again for this generous contribution to my home improvement efforts. It is this kind of community spirit that makes Maplewood Springs such a special place to live. Warm regards, Marcus Chen. I printed it out on nice paper, put it in an envelope with several photos of my completed path, and dropped it off at the HOA office mailbox on Sunday morning. Then I waited. For 3 days, nothing happened. I went back to work, my back and shoulders aching from all the physical labor, and told the story to anyone who would listen. My coworkers thought it was hilarious. My boss, who had dealt with his own HOA nightmares, bought me lunch and said I was his hero. Wednesday afternoon, I got home from work to find a notice taped to my front door. It was from the Architectural Review Committee, requesting that I attend the next HOA board meeting on Thursday evening to discuss my recent property modifications. I texted Dave. Got summoned to the board meeting, you coming? Would not miss it for the world, he replied. This is going to be better than cable. The HOA meetings were held at the community center, in a conference room that Brenda had apparently redecorated with a budget that probably could have repaved the entire subdivision. The walls were painted in soothing neutrals, there was fancy track lighting, and the conference table looked like it cost more than my car. I arrived right at 7 when the meeting was scheduled to start. The room was more crowded than I expected. Apparently word had gotten around about the paver situation, and people had come to watch the show. Dave was there, along with Linda from next door, Tom, who had taken my extra pavers, and at least a dozen other residents I recognized from around the neighborhood. Brenda sat at the head of the table, flanked by the 4 other board members. There was Richard, the vice president, who was a thin, nervous-looking man in his 50s. Carol, the treasurer, was a plump woman with kind eyes who looked uncomfortable. Jennifer, the secretary, was younger, maybe early 30s, and kept looking between Brenda and the crowd with an expression of mild panic. And finally, there was Harold, who was in charge of architectural review. He was the oldest of the group, probably in his 70s, and had the tired expression of someone who had been doing this for way too long. Let us call this meeting to order, Brenda said, and the room quieted down. She ran through the standard opening items, minutes from the last meeting, financial report, old business. Carol gave the treasurer's report, which mostly consisted of news about the community center plaza renovation, the very project that had generated the pavers now forming my path. Finally, after about 30 minutes of procedural stuff, Brenda cleared her throat and looked directly at me. We have a matter of new business regarding property modifications at 247 Maple Grove Drive. Mr. Chen, would you please approach the board? I walked up to the front of the room, very aware that everyone was watching. Mr. Chen, it has come to our attention that you recently installed a paver walkway on your property without first submitting plans to the Architectural Review Committee for approval. That is correct, I said. You are aware that all exterior modifications must be approved in advance. I am aware that major modifications require approval. However, according to Section 9.2 of the HOA Covenant, walkways and paths under 200 square feet constructed of approved materials do not require pre-approval, only notification after completion. My path is approximately 160 square feet, and I am notifying you now. I pulled out a copy of the covenant with the relevant section highlighted. I also included detailed photos with my thank you note to the board, which I assumed would serve as official notification. Richard leaned over and whispered something to Brenda. She did not look happy. Harold, the architectural review chair, spoke up. The boy is right, Brenda. Walkways under 200 square feet are on the pre-approved list. As long as he used approved materials and followed the general aesthetic guidelines, he did not need to come to us first. The materials were not purchased through an approved vendor, Brenda said. The covenant does not specify that materials must be purchased from approved vendors, I said. It only specifies approved material types. Pavers are listed as approved. The source is not mentioned anywhere in the regulations. You took community property, Brenda said, and now there was real anger in her voice. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I am sorry, Mrs. Patterson, but that is not accurate. Your crew dumped what appeared to be discarded construction debris on the community easement adjacent to my property. When I contacted the HOA office to arrange for removal, I was told that removal was my responsibility. I was given a notice threatening fines if the materials were not removed within 48 hours. The notice made no mention of community property. In fact, it explicitly stated that the materials needed to be removed, which would be a strange thing to say about property the HOA intended to keep. That is not what I meant, Brenda started, but I kept going. I have copies of all the correspondence, including your email stating that the materials had become my problem as the adjacent landowner. I also have photos timestamped from the day the pavers were dumped, showing that they were placed without any signage indicating they were HOA property, no tarp or covering to protect them, and no indication they were intended for storage rather than disposal. Someone in the crowd behind me started clapping, then quickly stopped when Brenda shot them a glare. Harold was looking at Brenda with an expression of dawning realization. Brenda, did you tell him the pavers were being discarded? I told him they needed to be removed from the easement, Brenda said. That is not the same thing. Harold pulled off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Did anyone tell Mr. Chen that the HOA intended to reuse those pavers? We had not decided what we were doing with them yet, Richard said quietly. So you dumped several tons of pavers on a community easement with no clear plan, told the adjacent homeowner he needed to remove them or face fines, and are now upset that he actually removed them. Harold looked around the table. Am I understanding this correctly? Jennifer, the secretary, was trying very hard not to smile. Carol, the treasurer, was looking down at her papers, her face red. This is ridiculous, Brenda said. The intent was clear. Those were HOA materials and Mr. Chen had no right to take them. Intent does not matter if it was not communicated, Harold said. He looked at me. Son, do you have those photos and correspondence you mentioned? I do. I can email them to the board if you would like. Please do. He made a note on his pad. Frankly, Brenda, I think Mr. Chen has been more than reasonable about this whole situation. From where I sit, he cleaned up a mess that we created, did so within the time frame we demanded, and even sent us a thank you note for the materials. The path is well constructed and meets all our covenant requirements. I do not see what the problem is. The problem is that he is making a mockery of this board, Brenda snapped. No, Dave said from the back of the room. The problem is that you tried to push around a new resident and it backfired. Mr. Hawkins, you are out of order, Brenda said. Am I? Because I seem to remember you doing something similar to me a few years back with those tree trimmings. And before that, there was the issue with Susan Martinez and her mailbox, and before that, the thing with the Johnsons and their fence. Dave stood up. You have a pattern, Brenda, of interpreting the rules in whatever way benefits you, or makes life difficult for people you have decided to target. Maybe it is time we talked about that. The room erupted. Apparently Dave had struck a nerve because suddenly multiple people were talking at once, sharing their own stories of conflicts with Brenda. Linda stood up and talked about being fined for having her trash cans visible from the street for 45 minutes on a non-collection day. Tom mentioned being cited for a lawn violation when his grass was exactly the height specified in the covenant. Someone else brought up being told they needed to repaint their shutters because the shade of black was not on the approved list, even though they had used the same paint that 5 other houses in the neighborhood had. It went on for 15 minutes, and I just stood there watching Brenda's face get redder and redder. Finally, Harold banged his hand on the table. "Enough, everyone, please." The room quieted down. Clearly, we have some issues to address beyond Mr. Chen's walkway. But for tonight, regarding the immediate matter at hand, I move that we officially acknowledge Mr. Chen's path as compliant with our covenant and close this matter. "Second," Carol said immediately. "All in favor?" Harold asked. Carol and Jennifer both raised their hands. Richard looked at Brenda, then slowly raised his hand as well. Motion carries. Mr. Chen, you are all set. Send those photos and correspondence to the board secretary for our records, but there is no violation and no further action needed. "Thank you," I said. "As for the rest of this," Harold continued, looking at Brenda, "I think we need to schedule a special board meeting to discuss some procedural issues. Brenda, we will be in touch." The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. People clustered in groups, talking animatedly. Several residents came up to shake my hand or thank me for standing up to Brenda. Dave was grinning like he had just won the lottery. Brenda gathered her papers, stood up, and walked out without speaking to anyone. "That went well," Dave said to me. "Did I just start a revolution?" I asked. "Nah, you just lit the fuse. That powder keg has been building for years." Over the next few weeks, things got interesting in Maplewood Springs. Harold, it turned out, had been increasingly unhappy with how Brenda ran the board but had never felt like he had the support to challenge her. My situation, combined with the outpouring at the meeting, had given him the opening he needed. A special board meeting was called for the following week. I did not attend that one, but Dave did, and he gave me the full report. Apparently, it had been intense. Harold had come prepared with a list of complaints he had received over the past 3 years, all involving Brenda's interpretation and enforcement of the covenant. There had been yelling. Jennifer had cried. Carol had apparently told Brenda to her face that she had been wanting to resign for a year because she could not stand working with her anymore. The end result was that Brenda was asked to step down as president. She refused. So Harold called for a vote of no confidence, which required a vote of the full HOA membership. That vote was scheduled for the next monthly meeting. In the meantime, I became something of a minor celebrity in the neighborhood. People stopped me on my walks to chat about the Pavers. Someone started a Facebook group called Maplewood Springs Residents United that quickly got over 100 members, all sharing stories and discussing HOA issues. There was talk of reviewing the entire covenant to see what needed updating. Brenda, for her part, went into full campaign mode. She sent out a mass email to all residents, talking about her 8 years of dedicated service and how she had worked tirelessly to maintain property values and community standards. She painted herself as a victim of a coordinated attack by residents who did not appreciate her efforts. It might have worked, except that Dave and several other longtime residents countered with their own email, laying out specific examples of Brenda's overreach and providing actual data showing that property values in Maplewood Springs were in line with similar neighborhoods with less aggressive HOAs. The vote of no confidence meeting was packed. The community center conference room could not hold everyone, so they moved it to the larger multipurpose room. I estimated at least 200 people showed up, which was remarkable for an HOA meeting in a subdivision of 350 homes. Harold chaired the meeting, keeping things orderly and parliamentary. Brenda gave a 20-minute speech defending her tenure. Then residents were allowed to speak for or against the motion. The against side had maybe 5 people. The for side had over 30 people who wanted to speak, and Harold had to impose a time limit to get through them all. The vote was not even close. 187 votes for the no confidence motion, 42 against. Brenda stood up, said, "This community will regret this decision," and walked out. Harold took over as interim president. Within a month, he had organized a proper election for board positions, with multiple candidates for each spot. The whole process was transparent and fair, with actual campaign statements and a debate night. It was like real democracy coming to our little subdivision. Carol stayed on as treasurer. Jennifer remained as secretary. Richard chose not to run again, saying he needed to focus on his business. 2 new board members were elected, both of whom ran on platforms of reasonable enforcement and better communication with residents. In the months that followed, the new board actually revised several sections of the covenant. They created clearer guidelines for what needed pre-approval and what did not. They established an appeals process for violations. They even lowered the annual HOA dues by 15% after discovering that Brenda had been approving expenditures for things like the conference room redecoration without proper board votes. As for me, my path became kind of famous in the neighborhood. People would walk by just to look at it. Linda told me that when her friend from another subdivision came to visit, she made a point of showing her the path that started a revolution. The path itself held up great through the winter. The pavers stayed level, drainage was good, and it made my life significantly easier. No more mud tracked into the garage, no more slipping on wet grass. Just a solid, functional walkway made from recycled materials that cost me nothing but 2 days of work and some muscle aches. One Saturday morning in late April, about 6 months after the whole paver incident, I was out front watering my flower beds when a car pulled up. It was not a white Lexus this time, but a blue Honda sedan. Brenda Patterson got out. I honestly did not know what to expect. Part of me wondered if she was going to yell at me or try to resurrect old grievances. But she looked different somehow, less polished, less aggressive. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail instead of that aggressive bob. "Mr. Chen," she said as she approached, "I hope I am not bothering you. Mrs. Patterson," I turned off the hose. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to apologize," she said, "and I will admit I had not seen that coming. For the pavers, for the meeting, for all of it. I have been doing a lot of thinking over the past few months, and I realized that I lost perspective on what the HOA was supposed to be about." "Okay," I said, because I honestly did not know what else to say. I convinced myself that I was protecting property values and maintaining standards, but really, I was just being controlling. And petty. She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "The paver thing, trying to make you clean up our mess and then getting angry when you turned it into a solution, that was petty. I know that now." "I appreciate you saying that. For what it is worth, your path looks really good. You did a nice job with it." She looked toward my side yard where the path curved elegantly from driveway to gate. "Better than anything I would have done with those old pavers." We talked for a few more minutes. She told me she had taken a step back to reevaluate her priorities, that she had been using the HOA as a way to feel important after her kids moved out and her career stalled. It did not excuse her behavior, but it at least explained it. "I am not trying to get back on the board or anything," she said as she was leaving. I just wanted to clear the air. You did not deserve the way I treated you. Thank you for saying that, Mrs. Patterson. I appreciate it. After she left, I called Dave to tell him about the conversation. Character growth, he said. Did not see that coming. Neither did I. So what are you going to do with your newfound fame as the guy who took down the evil HOA president? He asked, teasing. Absolutely nothing. I'm going to keep my head down, go to work, and enjoy my very nice free pathway. Good plan. Although, you know, Harold is looking for someone to fill Richard's old board position. Someone with an engineering background who knows how to read contracts and regulations. Not a chance, I said immediately. I fought the HOA once, I am not joining it, Dave laughed. Fair enough. But actually, 6 months later, I did end up joining the board. Not because I wanted to, but because Harold convinced me that the best way to make sure we did not end up with another Brenda situation was for reasonable people to get involved. So I ran for an open position and won, mostly because people remembered the Paver incident. Serving on the board was not nearly as dramatic as my first encounter with the HOA. Mostly it was just paperwork, reviewing maintenance requests and occasionally mediating disputes between neighbors. But it was also satisfying in a way I had not expected. We were actually making the community better, more livable, more reasonable. We changed the guest parking rules to be less restrictive. We approved a wider range of paint colors for front doors. We even converted part of the community center plaza, the one that had been redone with those fancy Italian tiles, into a little library and community herb garden that residents could use. The old Pavers, the ones that had started everything, became something of a neighborhood legend. New residents would hear the story and come by to see the path. Some people started referring to it as the Freedom Path, which I thought was a bit dramatic, but whatever. 3 years after I built that path, I was still living in Maplewood Springs, still serving on the HOA board and still getting compliments on my walkway. The Pavers had weathered beautifully, developing a nice patina that made them look almost intentionally vintage. One evening, I was sitting on my back patio with Dave, grilling burgers and enjoying the early summer weather. We could see the path from where we sat, winding from the driveway to the gate. You ever regret it? Dave asked. Taking those Pavers, stirring up all that trouble, I thought about it. About the 2 personal days I had taken from work, about my aching back and sore muscles. About the stress of standing up in front of the board, about the months of neighborhood drama that followed. Not even a little bit, I said. Good, because you did this neighborhood a favor. We needed someone to stand up to Brenda, and the Paver thing was just ridiculous enough to get everyone's attention. I just wanted a walkway, I said, laughing. Sure, but you got a revolution too. Pretty good deal. He was right. What had started as a petty move by an overreaching HOA president had turned into a catalyst for real change in our community. The neighborhood was better for it. People were more engaged, more willing to speak up, more likely to attend meetings and vote on important issues. And I had a really nice path that I had not paid a dime for. Sometimes things work out in the most unexpected ways. Brenda Patterson had tried to bully me into cleaning up the HOA's mess, probably expecting me to either comply meekly or rage ineffectively. Instead, I had found a third option, one that solved my problem, disposed of the Pavers, stayed within all the rules, and highlighted the absurdity of her position. The thank you note had been the perfect touch, genuine enough to be defensible, pointed enough to make the message clear. Dave had been right about that. As the sun set over Maplewood Springs that evening, casting long shadows across my beautiful recycled paver pathway, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not just about winning a petty dispute with an HOA president, but about being part of a community that had learned to stand up for itself, to question authority when it overreached, and to work together for real improvement. All because someone dumped a pile of old pavers in my yard and threatened to fine me if I did not clean them up. I raised my beer toward the path. "Thank you, Brenda Patterson, for the generous donation." Dave clinked his bottle against mine, "to the pavers that saved Maplewood Springs." "That is definitely going on my tombstone," I said. We both laughed, the sound carrying across the yard and out into the peaceful evening of a neighborhood that had learned that sometimes the best way to deal with an unreasonable authority is not to fight it directly, but to simply play by the rules better than they do. The path was still there when I eventually sold the house 7 years later, moving to Seattle for a new job opportunity. The new owners loved it, said it was one of the features that sold them on the property. I did not tell them the full story until after they had signed the papers, and when I did, they laughed so hard the wife had tears running down her face. "So you are saying," the husband said, "that our beautiful vintage paver path started as someone's attempt to bully you?" "Pretty much," I confirmed. "That is amazing. We are never removing this." "It is a monument to petty revenge done right." "Technically, it was not revenge," I said. "Revenge would have been malicious. This was just creative problem solving. Even better." The last time I drove through Maplewood Springs, about 2 years after I moved, I noticed they had put up a little historical marker near the community center. It talked about the neighborhood's commitment to resident engagement and reasonable governance. There was no mention of Brenda Patterson or the paver incident, but I like to think that the spirit of that whole episode lived on in the community's culture. Change does not always come from grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it comes from something as simple as a pile of unwanted pavers, an engineer with basic DIY skills, and a well-crafted thank you note. And sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all, but simply refusing to be bullied and finding a creative solution that leaves everyone better off than they were before. Well, everyone except the person who tried to bully you in the first place. That pile of pavers taught me something important about life in general. When someone tries to dump their problems on you, whether literally or figuratively, you have choices. You can get angry and fight. You can comply and feel resentful. Or you can find a creative third option that turns their problem into your opportunity. I chose the third option, and it made all the difference. Years later, when I told this story to my coworkers in Seattle during a discussion about dealing with difficult people, one of them said, "So basically, you won by being aggressively helpful." I had never thought of it that way, but he was right. I had taken what Brenda meant as a burden and treated it as a gift, with such thorough and public gratitude that her actual intent was exposed for everyone to see. I had not accused her of anything. I had not argued or threatened. I had just followed her instructions to remove the pavers, thanked her for making it possible, and let the absurdity of the situation speak for itself. It was the most passive-aggressive thing I have ever done, and also the most effective. The story of the Maplewood Springs pavers spread beyond just my neighborhood. Dave posted about it on some HOA reform forum, and it got picked up by a few local news blogs. I did one interview with a community newspaper, mostly because the reporter was a friend of Linda's, and I could not say no. The article was titled "Resident Turns HOA Dumping Ground into Beautiful Pathway," and it was pretty fair in its coverage. I got emails from people in other states, other HOA communities, thanking me for standing up to overreach. Some of them shared their own stories of HOA nightmares. A few asked for advice on handling their own situations. I tried to respond to all of them with the same message. Know your rules, document everything, and look for creative solutions instead of direct confrontation when possible. Not every situation could be resolved the way mine was. Some HOAs were truly malicious or corrupt, and those required lawyers and real fights. But a lot of them were like Brenda, Just people who had too much power and not enough oversight, who needed to be reminded that they served the community, not the other way around. The pavers themselves, those hundreds of pieces of concrete and stone that had started everything, continued to serve faithfully for years. They weathered storms and seasons, bore the weight of countless footsteps, and required almost no maintenance beyond the occasional weed pulling between the joints. Every time I walked that path during my years in that house, I smiled. Not just because it was a good path, though it was, but because it represented a moment when I had been tested and found a way through that was both principled and practical, both defiant and constructive. Brenda Patterson had wanted to make me jump through hoops, to assert her authority and make me acknowledge her power over my property. Instead, I had taken her power play and transformed it into community infrastructure and a catalyst for reform. It was not the fight she wanted, because it was not a fight at all. It was a solution, executed with such cheerful compliance that the underlying power dynamic was completely inverted. She had thought she was making me dance. Instead, I had made her look foolish without ever saying a critical word about her. That is the kind of victory that lasts. Looking back on the whole experience now, years later and hundreds of miles away, I still think the best moment was when I sealed that thank you note and dropped it in the HOA office mailbox. Everything that came after, the board meeting, the vote of no confidence, the community reforms, those were all consequences that flowed from that one moment of inspired pettiness wrapped in a veneer of sincere gratitude. I imagine Brenda opening that envelope, reading my carefully crafted words, looking at the photos of my completed path, and realizing that she had been outmaneuvered. Not through anger or litigation, but through simple compliance with her own demands, executed in a way that exposed the absurdity of those demands. It was beautiful, if I do say so myself. And the fact that I got a useful, attractive pathway out of the deal was just the practical cherry on top of the philosophical sundae. So if you ever find yourself facing down an unreasonable authority figure, whether it is an HOA president or a middle manager or a bureaucrat who seems to exist only to make your life difficult, remember the pavers. Remember that sometimes the best response is not to fight the battle they want you to fight, but to reframe the entire situation on your terms. Take their problem and make it your solution. Thank them for the opportunity. Document everything, stay within the rules, and watch as their own overreach becomes the instrument of their downfall. It worked for me and a pile of old pavers in Naperville, Illinois. Maybe it will work for you too. Just remember to send the thank you note. That part is crucial.